Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of the HPE Helion podcast. With me again today is Todd Lyle from Duncan LLC, who we've done several podcasts with. Todd, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me again, Stephen. I'm always excited to talk tech.
Yeah, so it's great to have you. And, for our listeners before, we've really focused on some of these interesting little books you've been publishing that I think are fantastic, introductions, great overviews of cloud. But today I want to talk about something a little different with you. I want to talk about computing as a utility. And I would say maybe it's been, Todd, I have to ask, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was this push where they talked about utility computing. Do you remember that? It seems to have gone away.
It's interesting you say that. It hasn't gone away. What happened is this word, the cloud, came about, and it confused and muddled a lot of things for a lot of organizations. A giant pot, which with everything was thrown into. At the end of the day, the cloud services that are the base, that are a large section of the network or the ecosystem for shared services, they're the actual technology behind that. And at the end of the day, the goal is for it to be consumed, such as other utilities, water, electric. I've mentioned before where my peers always scoff when I bring that up. But ultimately, that's part of the evolution. You have a revolution of technology, and then you have an evolution where we start to innovate and maximize. And this is where the whole idea of taking cloud services and consuming them as a utility comes to pass. And the more people that get on board, then we start moving into a commoditized environment where the prices are drop even more than they are today. If you look at where the prices are for Azure or for AWS or other services that are equal in par.
Well, it seems to me it's just interesting, and maybe it's just a terminology thing, but we probably should have stayed with utility computing because introducing cloud just confused everyone. And
It certainly did.
we focused on the how they deliver it, not the what they're getting. I mean, it seems to me in the United States, at least, or pretty much around the world now, to tell someone you don't get internet is absurd. It's like, oh, I don't get, television or something like that. That's just not the way it's going to work. So let's talk a little bit more about this. What does it mean when we say that, computing is a utility? Help me understand that. Help our audience get that basic concept.
Well, it's plug and play. You pay by the glass. Instead of capitalizing your servers and going out and getting licenses for your software and all of the other physical media, well, those days are gone now. You should be able to, just like flipping a switch, once you've established an account, you pay by the glass. It's a metered service. However, one of the challenges you see people now complaining that the meters continue to run. Well, there has to be accountability when you're talking about a utility. You have to be the responsible one to make sure your sinks don't leak and your light switches aren't remained on, or the air conditioner doesn't run in perpetuity. So there's responsibility that comes with this as individuals, but that's really it. You don't have to be a technician. You don't have to have a technical background to capitalize on these shared services. And that's where we're getting pulled back. We're really sitting on the fence in 2017 of the old school traditional IT and the new world of utility computing and how the layperson can easily consume it. It's getting simpler to use, and I think ultimately, Stephen, that's what it needs to be, is simple.
Right.
People have to know that they can trust that there's fidelity in the organizations that they're dealing with. And once that's in place, you're not worried about why or how it works. You're just worried about how you can maximize it for your primary goal or your primary mission.
Well, I think it's interesting, when I think about utilities and I think about whether it's a telephone company, the power company, or, the water company, a lot of those I guess they're kind of government companies. I don't know if that's the right word to use. I know it's like in the cable space, like there's cable companies and everyone hates the cable company, but I never really hear people hating, I hate my electric company or I hate my water company. They may complain about the price, but it's kind of almost like a monopoly type setup, but
Without a
hopefully,
doubt.
But is the computing model heading towards the cable company model, which is horrible, and we hate that? I wonder if there's two kinds of utilities.
Well, ultimately, you'll find, for example, here in Ohio, we have First Energy, and
Hmm.
nobody worried about anything until we had that outage about 6 years ago, and the whole Northeast corridor went out. So you have the outages and those challenges. Paynesville, for example, up on the lake, they run their own utility. The city, they do their
Hmm.
own electricity. So you have different ways of that electricity being generated, both public and private. And in today's world, it does very quickly. The public and private sectors meld together where we as the taxpayer, the consumer, really aren't aware that it's been privatized. For example, the post office, that's a shared service, but that's privatized. Many people still think that the employees are federal employees. So it comes down to understanding, having an appreciation for your utility, where you happen to be and consuming it, and understanding some of the nuances. But again, we don't really worry about the electricity until there's a large issue. But day to day, we're out there making it happen. Same thing with water. Think of the people that are behind the scenes making sure that in Western cultures, our water is clean and potable. So many people on a daily basis are out there testing and treating and working to ensure that we have fresh water to consume. It's an amazing opportunity. But again, we don't need to know everybody behind the scenes that are operating the utility. We just have to know that we can trust, and we go from trust to complacency. And that's really where we have to get here with consuming computing as a utility. We have to get past all the short-term noise and get to the point where we become pleasantly complacent.
Well, I think after AWS's outage yesterday, the complacency, everyone's probably in panic mode today. But
They are.
they are, but they'll live with it, right? I mean, it's the first time something major like that happened, but the world didn't end. I mean, it was just a
Well,
couple
quite
hours
frankly,
later, it was up.
exactly. Moreover, these things that we're saving on AWS are replicated up to 3 times.
Mhm.
So when set up properly, you can have an outage in Virginia, in Roanoke, and not have it affect the overall operation of the consumer. That's one of the reasons you want a tactical crossload. So when you're setting, you being the consumer,
Mhm.
when you're setting this up, you need to think about your disaster recovery and failover and switch over. What are we going to do? AWS has a good, as you can see yesterday. So we had an outage, big deal. People were back up and running, moving forward, accomplishing what they needed to do, and they didn't really recognize that there had been for the people who had set it up properly, there was no
There was no
lapse.
issue.
Correct.
It's on the company that's using the AWS service to deliver to do it properly. And I think there's some learning for a lot of companies there who just assumed I just throw it on the cloud and boom, I'm done. And obviously
Exactly.
it's not. There's more to do. But I think the typical consumer probably didn't notice it. I mean, I don't know if I call my brother who's, he never watches computer stuff that much. He just uses it. He probably wouldn't have known it happened.
We saw that it happened because we monitor it, but we
Yeah.
didn't hear from a single client.
So yeah, customers don't know. I think sometimes in the computer world, right, we're so into it. That's our world we live in, but most people don't live in that same world.
Well, and see, therein lies the exact point here, Stephen. We want to be able to get the ability to consume computing as a utility, get it to that point where they're not worried about it. And we have some redheaded stepchildren that are pulling us back, and a lot of the IT folks are problematic when it comes to this. And then so are the leaders, because the leaders will default and say, well, I'll let my IT handle this. Well, therein lies what's the motivation of your IT department or your IT contractor? What are they doing? What technologies are they selling? Because that's where you're going to stick if you don't allow yourself to go up to a higher, more strategic level and say, okay, I can trust that HP or IBM is rolling out a quality shared service. They have a terrific uptime. I know they're not going anywhere, so let me get on with my day.
Well, I think this is also part of this trend where CIOs affect the business now. And the idea that technology is just, oh, I need servers to run this app, those are done. Now, the services that the IT department delivers, even for SMBs, is critical to the business. It's part of how the business operates and competes. And I think that change is really critical. And companies that understood that yesterday was no big deal, and companies that didn't were in a panic.
Amen.
I mean that's that's the whole message in a nutshell. So I wanted to close a little bit on SMB. I know HPE where I work, and a lot of the focus of my work is that enterprise, these massive scale, and I'm asked to think about things that are so big that very few people can comprehend it. But most customers, the majority of customers, are SMBs, and I know that's a big space you work in. What are SMBs' take on all this? Where are they at? Because it's going to require the CEO to step in. Most SMBs probably don't have a CIO. So what do you see in this space and these utility computing around SMBs?
Well, ultimately, they're 98% of the marketplace, and no wonder organizations want to go after enterprise, because it's the
easier.
Big bucks. Yeah, absolutely, it's much easier. My vision always has been for the layperson, for the SMB, to be able to plug in with minimal effort. Now, that's a challenge presently, mind you.
Right.
And we could get into a discussion about hybrid scenarios and migrating the data and those challenges. But in a perfect world, the SMB is going to make the transition when they know when inherently they know it's fail-safe, that they can go to an organization, whether it be a cloud services brokerage or a service provider, a cloud services provider, that's got their back and is going to make it simple for them. And that's one of the beautiful parts about our business with Duncan is we work to simplify so that you can come and have a relationship, set it up, do all of the proper steps in the implementation and the processes and the procedures, and then once that's up and running, move on.
Yeah, well, Todd, I want to thank you again for joining us today. You give us a good different perspective. A lot of the time I talk to startups doing pretty complicated technology, trying to understand it, but you really give us kind of a real world, feet on the ground kind of thing of how people are using this. And, this is the first. We're starting a new series. And so for those that are listening to this podcast, be on the lookout. I think we'll be pushing this out every other week, and we'll be running on the blog as well. And Todd, thank you again for joining us. And we look forward to continuing this discussion. Again, really focusing on utility computing and the SMB space. And thanks for talking with us today.
Stephen, thank you. And thank you, HPE, for your hospitality.